what you are basically. Deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
Honestly expressing yourself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Parallel Mic podcast. Tonight on the show we have a new guest. His name is Eben Hacker. He is a co-creator with Gabriel Custode at Watchman Privacy. Gabriel was a previous guest on the show, Eben, and we've spoken once before. And tonight we're going to be talking about AI, psychological warfare, and hopefully getting some practical information for listeners to escape this wave of technocracy that is coming our way. And I thought we could start by just asking you about your background, and maybe you could tell me and listeners a little bit more about how you became an expert in this field.
Yeah, Mike, thanks for inviting me. I've studied cybersecurity for now more than 10 years. I've, done all sorts of investigation on the dark web, mainly for companies, for like corporate research and more like, on the private side, private sector, corporate espionage and counterintelligence, that type of things. And also, of course, one-on-one coaching with C-level executive up to speaking to a crowd of like 300 people in a Monday morning and making sure they get some actionable advice. Also, I have done, I have an art side to it. I do, 3D art, and I've worked for video game companies. And yeah, I've basically alternated between the two. Sometimes the cybersecurity company asks you to do some art, and then I'm the one doing it. And sometimes the video game company needs, some market research on the dark web, and then I'm the one doing it. So that's a bit my two sides. And more recently, I was the technical advisor for escapethetechnocracy.com, which is an online platform made by Gabriel Custode for the Watchman Privacy. And you can, it's basically all this knowledge that is put into easily digestible course that you can buy and then watch. So this is what I'm doing now.
And you mentioned a few things there that I think listeners will certainly be interested in. One was research on the dark web. The other one was cybersecurity. And I'm guessing that you've got a background that maybe you wasn't always on the side of cybersecurity in terms of protecting people. Was you somebody when you was younger that was able to hack things and you kind of explored that area?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a secret that a lot of cybersecurity experts started on the darker side. Yeah, I mean, on the fun stuff, I have, modified some early Doom-like game on iPhone to then put like superpower and be like invincible, and then just like in one day achieving like leaderboard in the game, and like modifying the sniper rifle to be like a machine gun, and then like doing long range, just mowing through people and going to leaderboard. Yeah, I've done a bit. I mean, when you know about things, it's hard to not sometimes have fun. Although I never have made anything malicious. I never for me, there was a clear cut between, you have a bit of laugh between friends and you show what's possible to, you're actually like stealing and harming people. And that's for me, the line I never crossed. But yeah, for sure, like video game modding, all sorts of things. I do it to this day. I do mess with spammer and scammer, like sometime on a deeper level that, like spamming them back and doing things of that nature. And for this, for me, like if you're trying to steal me, I have no moral problem, to like counterattack and mess with you back. So yeah, I've done a bit of this. mostly in video game, to try to be at the leaderboard, right? But also, again, never in a malicious way.
I've been watching some of those videos recently on YouTube where people actually someone's trying to scam them and they hack their webcam or they hack into their computer and they start to mess with them. So it does look pretty fun. And like you said, I don't think there's a moral line that's crossed that. At the end of the day, if somebody has tried to steal from you or attack you maliciously online, then there is some to and fro that can happen there. And do you have any fun stories about that?
Yeah, I never went that far to hack webcams and stuff. And in a way, I'm sad because I wish I could have their reaction on screen. The one thing I've done is, you have your typical scammers that lurk into Telegram groups for like Bitcoin and cryptos and things of that nature. And they try to trick you to enter the seed, the password of your wallet in some website. And I was thinking, man, what if I give them what they want and I give them a lot of seed phrase, because what people don't realize is those websites, they're like badly coded together. Some of them are even coded by AI. Like you see inside the code of the website, you see that this was coded by, some GPT-like chatbot, which is hilarious. And in the cases where they sent me a website to type my phrase, they received the information with an email. So I was like, oh, that's cool. So first I know their email, right? So that's like interesting. There's all sorts of stuff that you can do once you know their real email. And then the other thing was every time you input something, they get an email. So naturally the next question is like, okay, what if I create 1 billion seed phrase and I just, spam their website and see what happens. And then I was in there, as I was doing this, I was with like alternate Telegram account. I was in their chat, right? Monitoring what they were doing. I was like, oh, bro, the database is fucked up. We have all sorts of issues. And I was right. I was like, what's going on with the database? Fred, what's the problem? Can you tell me? I was like, we have a small issue. But the problem, and with Gabriel, we thought about, putting this on YouTube. The problem is you don't see the reaction. So it's kind of it's funny to think like they got like 1 billion email and they got kicked out of Google because of that. But on the other side, you need, it has to be more entertaining than just, and this is what they show you on YouTube. You have a lot of people, lots of cybersecurity researchers who do like me, but they never publish anything because, they just waited like, give me 1 hour to mess with you. And then they move to something else. And on YouTube, they will tend to do the more like visual aspect of it, which might not be the best way to counteract them, but that gives you more YouTube video because now you can see their webcam and doing things. And by the way, I would invite people, as we're going to discuss a bit about big tech and data collection, think about, what a few hackers like me can do with, this. And if you watch those YouTube videos, they also sometimes use drones so that they can fly over the building and see how it's inside and confirm that this is the location. And this is done privately. So imagine, what capabilities you can have now in, armies and stuff like this. Like, I think this is also, and for me, what was very insightful is if a private person can do this with a very limited budget, what can do, intelligence agency, ginormous corporation. Anyway, yeah, so that's some of the, I would say morally ambiguous. But again, I have no problem with that. If you try to steal my money, go F yourself,
I really wanted to get your opinion on what's happening in the US right now, because I know you and Gabriel do a lot on AI, and I'm just starting your AI course now. So maybe in the future we can come back and talk about that. But I wanted to get your take on what's happening right now. It feels like they're moving really fast in the US. We've got a lot of big tech billionaires like Sam Altman. We've got Larry Ellison of Oracle, and they're talking about mRNA. They're talking about big AI and data centers. What's your view on where this is going, and where do you think they're trying to take us with AI?
Yeah, it seems there is this, modern call that the computer is going to solve everything. And, This is not new by far. When I was younger, I remember it was already like the early, machine moderation. They wouldn't call it AI, of course, but like this is something that is like going on for a while. If you look at the style of Donald Trump, he likes, he's grandiose. He has this flamboyant archetype where he wants to announce big things and going to have big changes. And I think this AI plays into this, like it's the thing that everybody discuss, and now even the grandma sends you emoji with ChatGPT and tools like this. So everybody talks about AI and he wants to do something about it. And also, to show a bit of, I would say, digital imperialism that, the US is still there and we can still, well, again, nothing wrong with that. Every country is trying to do its thing, right? Absolutely nothing wrong with it. But of course, you have your typical, big tech suspect who are kind of like orbiting around this. And I mean, this is like simply in terms of money, if you're the one hosting the data center that is going to train this new Stargate thing or whatever they are calling it, that's a lot of money for you. And, like, I think Donald Trump, he wants to show that the economy is doing well, that the stock market is going up, and that this is a way for him to a bit like spur development into, or like, also big tech was against him, like he had to battle all sorts of, he was censored. It's also a way for him, I think, to like give them something with this AI project. Now, this is, I would say that the nice aspect of it, and I know maybe you might be surprised to call this nice, but I think there is much darker than it. When people say, "Oh, this is dark," I'm like, yeah, well, you barely scratched the surface. Let's go deeper. I mean, there is this push, and it's really like what one could call a technocracy, where it's like ruled by the experts. And I mean, even you, Mike, you introduced me as an expert in cybersecurity and as the one you invite. And again, nothing wrong with that. But I found funny how sometimes we just diminish our own thought in the face of an expert. I noticed like we all do this, it's like, oh, this guy is expert in architecture. Oh, yeah, I'm not an expert, but, so you have now, they had COVID, and if you believe that the vaccine, if you believe this was the greatest invention after the pyramids and the steam engine, of course you want to do more of it, right? If you believe that, again, you want like more, bigger, and they have this completely disconnected from reality thing with like, are we going to have AI design mRNA? I'm like, we didn't even figure out how to do the first one correct. So how do you want to move on? And I think it's really scary now. On its own, I don't really care. Again, if you want to do experiment with mRNA, I don't really care. But if you ask me to take part in a ritualistic, injection later in my life, then I might have some issue with it. And for me, this is where the line is cut. It's like, okay, they are spending all this money, and now you want a return of investment, because I mean, you did this research, and if your magical potion is not used, then you're gonna get angry, right? And there is nothing better than a new crisis to like roll something new. I see this as the thing, but yeah, I mean, it's the same as the military. You have now the artificial intelligence industrial complex. And before you had the military industrial complex, and you have, the welfare complex. And it's just one more thing, or it's like, oh, we need, a big investment to spur and to do all sorts of stuff. And yeah, it's going in a path that is, let's say, interesting. I remember when people were saying, oh, AI is going to rule us all. But don't worry, we're going to disconnect it from internet, right? Now, wake up, people. Like, what do we do with those systems? We connected to internet straight away, right? As soon as they were invented, we just connected them. So we are past this point. Then I remember people like, oh, if it, threatens the user, we're going to disconnect them of internet, like no harm is done, right? And now what happened, right? It already happened, right? You had, I think it was the Microsoft one that said like, to a user, you're like a scourge on earth and you should consider getting rid of yourself or something. And we just keep pouring more money, more energy into those things. And I think there is inherent risk, and you have this religion of the AI God, which is supposed to solve everything. And I think it's what we were discussing before the podcast. There are a certain group of people who cannot admit that humans are natural and flawed. And if you want to perfect them, well, it requires, extraordinary means and coercion. And we certainly see some of that now. I don't think that Stargate will be necessarily that. Again, I think it's more, a type of like new deal, we're gonna kick the economy up but there is certainly like it's building, the bricks for the next wave that is coming. But, at the same time, one day after this, actually, as we were recording the Money Capital show, you had China releasing DeepSeek that just completely obliterated this and, proved that you also don't need this enormous research to run AI, and you can actually run them sometime on your own computer. I'm sure, Mike, we're going to discuss more into this. But yeah, so yeah, I'm a bit ambivalent on this. There is, of course, I think great things that can come out of it, but the way it's done now, I think it's in the most technocratic, top-down approach, almost militaristic in a certain way.
I guess it always depends on the society that you're in as well, Urban. Like every tool can be used for good or it can be used for tyranny. And the problem we've got is there's a lot of people out there who are really excited about tyranny. So all of these tools will be used that way. They will take it down that path. And what you just alluded to there around transhumanism, this is the idea that they're going to merge man with machine, but that is actually only a temporary status. They want post-humans, which is where we're gone. And I don't know about you, Evan, but I'm not too happy about the idea of being gone and having all of my family and disappeared because machine's going to take over. But there are really psychopathic people in the world who want that. I mean, the World Economic Forum literally talk about this fourth industrial revolution. And of course, they are kind of like the pointy end of a pyramid of this whole corporate world. They all have these CEOs going to the WEF and all of the politicians. And that's when it really sends a chill down your spine, because you realize that occupying all these top levels of power, there are people who genuinely want this and believe it's going to happen. And Sam Altman, who was stood next to Trump recently, he actually wrote a blog post a few years back talking about it. He was saying it's the merge. We're going to have to merge with machine because we're going to have computer and human brain interface, and AI is going to become super intelligent and then sentient. So it's almost like there's no choice. We have to do this. Whereas what I believe is there is a choice. We don't have to do that. You just want to do that. So I guess my question there is, where do you think the risk really lies with AI? Do you think the AI is the risk, that it could be all those things, or that the risk is actually the humans in control of the AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I will start by, a story. Imagine you're John Connor, right? And you're facing the Terminator waves over and over, this robotic overlord like trying to kill you. And you probably are using some kind of electronics, to, like do the counterinsurgency, to, communicate with other people. And I'm sure if you had ChatGPT on your laptop, or DeepSeek or whatever AI, you would totally use it to see how you can defeat the machine, right? Like, I mean, think about it, right? It would be natural to like, let's ask, the machine itself what we can do. I think it's look, AI was invented that, that ship has sailed. That is, since, I don't know, 2022 or so when ChatGPT was released, this is like, we live in this world now. There is no coming back. And what you said about, the people who control AI, I think it's a good way to put it, because, you can do now evil things with an evil human plus an AI. You don't need just the AI. You can do, you could potentially code a ransomware with an AI. Right. And you don't need an AI takeover to do this. You need just a psychopath to use the tool. And in a way, it's a bit like the Ring of Power in Lord of the Ring, right? I mean, how many rings should we create and should we give to people? So if you create one, well, we all saw the movie, we know what happened, right? Now, if you create a few of those, then becomes the question, who should be entrusted to have those? And we also know that it's probably not going to turn out good. The only real answer to this is if everyone has a ring of power, then it completely nullifies. Now, of course, you could, smartly edit my clip and say, I'm like Sam Altman. We must merge with machine. There is no other way around. But it's not what I'm saying. I see more risk into things like regulation and preventing people from buying GPUs and running their own model. And I mean, if you look at Europe, they wanted some of the most hardcore regulation. They wanted that if you have more than, I don't know, like 100 GPU, which in 2 years, that's going to be the power of your phone, right? So they wanted that. No, then you need to have a license or something, which is ludicrous.
I guess a really good analogy of that is guns, right? In the US, people are allowed to own guns, and people say, oh, we should get rid of the guns. And then it's like, well, okay, now you've only got psychopaths with all of the military might, which is the government. And it will be the same with AI. If you regulate it and say you can't use it, they're still going to use it. They're still going to have it. So at least if you've got the gun or if you've got the AI, it neuters the power of these totalitarians a little bit.
Yeah, totally, right? And one of the reasons why we created a course on escapethetechnocracy.com was because, right now we felt that we are being ping pong, it's like between the left and right in a way in the political spectrum. And if you don't step out and you think bigger, then you just go from one side to the other. And with AI, we see this. We are like, we have, what you described, the elites, the AI overlord that have all their weird things going and doing. And then on the other side, you have, we should ban it and we should never, ever use it. And it's going to bring apocalypse on Earth and there is nothing we can do about it. I was like, who is going to take the third approach, which is, hey, let's do a careful measurement of what's going on. Let's explain how it works in a I think sometimes people use a lot of technical mumbo jumbo because it sounds like magic. It's like a magic spell and you're the magician and only you know how to say those words, right? So let's break it down. Let's make it digestible for people. Let's show people how they can run those on their machine. And we work, I cannot possibly summarize more than 4 hours of content into 10 minutes. But if your audience is interested, they can check out, escapethetechnocracy.com. And there is, the AI, I think it's called the AI resistance or the AI technocratic resistance course. They can even use discount code if they want. Just put parallel and you're going to have a discount. And then you can see for yourself and you can have the view of people who have done deep research on this topic and want, regulation is not going to save us. And the AI overlord is also not good. We need a third way. We need to do, for the people, by the people. And we need to go back to a more human and sane scale, So that's a bit, I mean, in a way, I summarized the course in 10 minutes. But we even have a whole debate in this course for 1 hour where we go on we answer all the questions. We also answer them from a Christian perspective, And, I'm not really religious, but there is sometime in those AI model some stuff that are a bit satanic in nature. I have to say, I'm not religious, Mike, but
that's okay. Well, I'm not religious either, but I am a Christian.
But yeah.
Not the kind you'll find in a church, I guess. But that really interests me because I think a lot of the people who are working in that space are not atheists either. I think they have a belief that man can transcend itself and humanity is just a defunct state. We have to get rid of it and become gods. And I think some of these people do believe that. And I think some of the countries in the world are actually trying to implement some kind of end times prophecy. They want to advance that. And they believe AI will be a tool for that.
Yeah. I have to say, this is when I have a problem with some of the religious people. Like, if you're trying to make some ancient prophecy in some book, you know, and we let the listener speculate on which book we are talking about become true, I think like this is also extremely dangerous. But you know, like ideas are a bit like viruses, you know, they spread from humans to humans, and they infect and mutate. You know, when you get an idea, then it mutates in your brain. And there is one, for instance, that is deeply disturbing. It's called the Rhopscobasilex. And this one is like, imagine a benevolent AI that is very friendly. It's going to cure cancer. It's going to do the correct mRNA, like really correct. You know, no one is going to die. It's going to be heaven on earth. But it needs to be created, and it needs you, Mike, to work on it, like to abandon your podcast today to work on it. And how it does this is, if you don't do this now, in the future, it's going to clone you and it's going to digitally torture you to motivate your current self to work on it. And you know, when this was published on a forum, people went mad over, you know, this was published in some AI skeptic forum where they were all scared of Terminator. And then some dude write this, and then like they all lost their mind. But this shows you, like, I mean, think about this idea. Like, isn't it a bit demonic? As soon as I knew about it, I was like, I want to tell everybody because it sounds kind of fun. But if you think like the deeper aspect, it's really scary, right? It's really, really scary. And also what's interesting is, you know, it just wants to do good. It wants to bring heaven on earth, but it must be created, right? So you don't even need like an evil agenda to turn something like benign into evil. And I mean, if you look at, you know, the biggest crimes against mankind in you know, the beginning of last century, you know, with like communism in Russia, this was basically like, we're gonna create heaven on earth, right? But everybody must agree with.
You know, I was listening to my friend's podcast just yesterday, and he had a full-blown communist on the show, and they was kind of debating. And I don't think he understood before he invited this guy on the show that he was a communist, like a full-on card-carrying communist. He was even advocating for the Federal Reserve. And I was like, I've never heard anyone think the Federal Reserve's a good idea, but this guy did, because it's part of Mac's Communist Manifesto as a central bank. So he was all for it.
Oh, yeah.
He was talking about how all of these billionaires are terrible and all these oligarchs. And don't get me wrong, I've got my own gripes with all of that. But for him, it was coming from a place of envy. So it wasn't that he had some legitimate grievances. Like for me, I might say, yeah, these tech overlords creating a technocracy that's going to enslave humanity, that's wrong. But it's not necessarily just because they've got wealth. You know, wealth's not in and of itself a bad thing. So he was focusing on the wealth part. And at one point in the conversation, he said, we should just line up all these people against a wall and shoot them in the head. And I was like, that is exactly what a communist would do. To get to utopia, you have to begin by lining up everyone who disagrees and shooting them in the head. So you just reminded me of that then, because, yeah, there are people out there who believe that's the path forward. But the utopia is always on the other side of some kind of mass culling of people who don't agree, right?
Yeah, of course. And you know, as my philosophy teacher would say, close your eye, believe in your perfect utopia. You know, everything is perfect. Now, you're going to agree that some people might not like it. I think it's fair, right? Even if you do everything as you think, some people won't like this. Now, what do you do about them, right? Well, if you believe this is an utopia and it's your perfect solution, then you're going to end up in a dark path very quickly. But you know, with communism, I mean, this is its own rabbit hole. But you know, that there is like technocracy, like, you know, the technological coercion and rule made by expert. That is like in Allende, Chile. Not many people know this, but they had this early attempt where they hired some programmer from Great Britain, And they had this whole central economy, and they used like telegraphic wires to send every day how much shoes this factory has produced, how much airplane, how much this and that. And then they would have basically the president in a room with like 5 experts deciding every day what they should do about it. Right. And of course, this was, the left-wing government. If my South American history is clear, I think they were then overthrown by Pinochet. Anyhow, but there is, I think, a connection between this idea of technocracy and left-wing / communist ideology. Because if you think this is a bit, to each according to their needs, right? Okay, who decide who needs what? Well, you need someone. And then most people, I think, would naturally say, well, if you need someone, you better have an expert. And now you have a technocracy. So I see a strong parallel between technocracy and, not Soviet Union, communism in general, like with the central planning. But, even with, it's funny that you said that, because I was on a subreddit called, I think, Technocracy, where people were like, how do we have a technocracy today? They were debating, how do we apply this system of government? And I didn't, because, I would be shadow bound, but I wanted to, guys, we are living in one. You just don't see it. You should just open your eyes, and if you don't look, then you're not looking close enough.
Yeah, I think so too. And probably what we see is only a small, tiny percentage of what's possible. I think they purposely stall their agendas in terms of implementing them, because they need us to go along with it, and they need us to be conditioned slowly to accept it. And I think that's been going on a lot over the past 15, 20 years. They right now have capabilities that are far beyond what we see. But, going back to the Lord of the Rings analogy that you gave earlier, the ring of power is not something you reveal. Everyone else is using these rings, but you never reveal the true amount of power that comes from that one ring, because then everyone would throw away their rings and you lose your power. In fact, it reminds me of during World War II, like when they broke Enigma, they didn't tell anyone because the power came from not telling. But what was really interesting about that, Urban, is even after the war, although they'd broken Enigma, they kept it within a very closed circle. And then what the Americans did was they started to sell Enigma machines to their other allies who didn't know they'd been broken. So now they could spy on their own allies. So
Yeah. The Enigma machine is interesting, because it's actually probably one of the first successful hack and digital war, wage against someone else. But you could make it secure. If you used it properly, you could make it reasonably secure. And then what the US did, and you can look, it's called Crypto AG. It was a Swiss company. You had like weaker machines that they would sell, to quote unquote enemies. And those were just bad encryption machine. But what they started doing as well, which was clever, is in the manual itself, they would give to like true allies the correct manual, which explain everything, how you must use it to the full capabilities. And then it's like fully encrypted and secure. And then to other country, they would give like slightly, different manual that would not teach all the details about the machine. And it would in turn make the encryption weaker. So by selectively giving one manual or the other, they could basically choose. And what's funny is certain countries realized this. Right, it's like they on their own, they took down the machine. Or we can use it in a much better way, and then they wrote to people from Crypto AG about it, right? And those were salesmen, those they didn't know about the conspiracy, they didn't know that the company was not a real one.
And just for listeners who don't know, Crypto AG was a company that spun off out of World War II. It was Switzerland based, and it was a front for the CIA and eventually the NSA, and they started to create encryption devices and sell them to all of the world's governments and intelligence services. And all of these devices were actually backdoored, and nobody knew about this for about 60, 70 years. I don't think it was ever actually admitted, but just to fill listeners in as to where we are in that story, and I'll hand it back to you, Urban.
Yeah, so through different encryption manual, right, they would have more or less powerful encryption. And when certain countries figured this out, what they started doing is they started to supply their local rebel with those bogus machine, and then they kept the proper manual to themselves. So it was basically backdoor on all sorts of level. You had like the bigger player were like backdooring everyone, and then the smaller player backdooring sub player. And because they never wanted to reveal the secret, you never saw like, I don't know, I'm just making this up, but like Colombia admitting that, oh yeah, we bought backdoor machine, because they were also, using them for forks that then themselves didn't know, and then they could listen. So you had like a whole interesting, like kind of like Mexican standoff of encryption, of like everybody was kind of denying, but everybody kind of knew that those were funny machines. And then they were like manipulating the manuals. And so it's a whole story. Yeah, it's an interesting story.
What I like about that story, though, is it just shows you, it gives you an insight, a window into how it's working at that level. And I guess anything that they're doing to each other, they're doing to us times 1,000 in terms of our devices and what we do. And that's what I really like about what you and Gabriel are doing, is you're at least giving us the ability to defend ourselves. You're giving us some knowledge and information, because you don't have to use these things. Like, for example, with AI, you don't have to use AI. You don't have to use cryptocurrencies. You don't have to use Bitcoin. They're all individual choices. You might not want to use them at all, but it's still important to understand where we're going and how they're going to be used or might be used against you. And if you don't mind me bringing this up, Ben, you actually told a story in that workshop that we did for my other show, the Parallel Systems Broadcast. For those that don't know, it was a members only workshop, so it's not actually something that's been released on the podcast. But you told a story about a guy who was going through an airport, and he was a user of Bitcoin, and he made a transaction like 13 years ago or 12 years ago when Bitcoin had only just started, and they pulled him over for that. And I wondered if you'd share that with listeners, because I found that really fascinating.
Yeah, so are people listening and data mining everything you're doing and taking everything you do out of context decades later and incriminating you? Yes, they are. And even if they are not doing it now, as they famously said, we record everything, and then in the future, we're going to totally use it against you just in case. Now, what is Bitcoin? Again, this is like a long topic, and we have actually a workshop, a course about Bitcoin on Escape the Technocracy platform. That is like, this one is hundreds of hours of research into exactly what you described. And we show people how you can track the money on the blockchain. We got access to some of the tools that are used for those investigations, and we show you those tools. Now, I'm not gonna, speculate how we got access to them, but we got access to them, and we show the graphs and the things that they can do, and they see, okay, you received money from this and that, and you did this, and we show you all of those things. So if you're interested, you can also, get the course and just watch it at your own pace. It's called the Sovereign Bitcoin course. Although we might rename it, but if you go on the website, it should be easy enough. And don't forget, Parallel coupon. If you use this code, you're going to have a nice discount. He used Bitcoin in a completely legitimate and lawful way somewhere around 2012. And think about it. So he had no reason to hide his identity. He had no reason to not use his real name. He had no reason to, to hide anything. He just bought Bitcoin in a legal way by using his real name, his identity card, his whatever. And then he used it as a currency, right? To buy maybe coffee, whatever. I don't know what he did with it, but he did. Now, imagine this yourself, right? If you receive money from a third party, Bitcoin, you get it, and you get it in a private way because nobody know you got it, right? The money is technically still under his name. Now, in the fiat system, in the paper money system, that is understood, right? If I give you money and then you use the money and you commit a crime with this money, I don't get accused whatsoever because it is understood that the money transfer hand. But as I was saying, with those tools, and this is what is vicious, is when you use those tools, you get like a tunnel vision where you're like, oh, let me show the graph. Let me track this. Let me do that. And it gives the impression that you got the correct guy. Well, maybe the, 10 transactions that you follow were 10 different people, could have been one doing 10 transactions, could have been 10 different people, could have been whatever. So what happened is in the investigation, they got his name. Because again, if you get 2,000 transactions and only like 5 have names, you're going to focus on the one that have name and you're going to just completely ignore all the rest. And one day, this guy, completely oblivious of what was happening, he just crossed some airport and then he got detained and then he got interrogated. And then they started asking him question, why did you buy Bitcoin in 2012? Why did you buy this? Did you went on this website? And I was like, oh no, I have no idea what's going on. And then later when they call, the central, I don't know, agency, I don't know who they, but like, the headquarters, they're like, oh yeah, so sorry. Actually, we know it was not you because we did an investigation on you, right? So he was not even aware that he was under investigation, right? But we kind of like look around and it was obvious, but we just forgot to cross your name from the list. We're so sorry. Yeah, just carry on with your.
And this was because he sent some money to somebody else like 10 years ago, and that person who he sent money to did something.
Yeah, exactly. And he bought it legally. He had nothing. For all we know, he could have bought, some cheese or some coffee or going in a restaurant, could have been anything. But no, like the person who received the money then did something and then he got, in trouble. And this is as if, you cross a border and it's like, oh yeah, we noticed you withdrew from this ATM 20 years ago, this $100 bill with this serial number. What did you do with it? You have no clue. It was 20 years before.
Yeah, you can't defend yourself at that point. You don't have the data, but they have the data.
They have all the data and they have those tools. And this is what I was explaining about our course is nobody else will show you this because, the Bitcoiner, they want number go up and it's nice and it feels good. But Bitcoin today can hurt people in really, really bad way if you don't know what you're doing. And I can safely say that with Gabriel, when we brainstorm about this course, this was the hardest ever work that I've done in my life because it is so hard to defend yourself against this. This is like the best tool got shut down. The other tools, they got scared. They voluntarily shut down. A way to describe it is with the arrest of Samurai developer, like Bitcoin developer were sacrificed, on the altar, and then the ETF was approved. When you see it like this, the same week you have, 2 of the best Bitcoin developer getting in jail. And then at the same time, the ETF is approved. It's like, okay, yeah, you can have your ETF. You can have your number go up, but you won't have freedom of transaction. You won't have financial privacy. And by the way, all of this financial privacy in the fiat world, it's expected. Again, with your credit card, if you use your credit card to a merchant and then the cashier do something bad with your money, no one would in the right, it's just, no one would in the right mind say, oh, you're going to be suspected of anything.
Yeah. In some ways, there's more privacy using your bank at times because I know when I was paid in some Bitcoin once, getting out of there, I had to go through KYC, and bearing in mind, I wasn't aware of the other ways of doing it, but I definitely tried and it was not simple. It wasn't easy. I'm not saying you can't do it, but what I'm saying is it felt like I had to give away my privacy at about 3 different points when I was using it. And that was one of my early experiences with it. And I thought, well, my bank looks more private than this.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. So, this is challenging for me because we could discuss for 4 more hours. No, actually, it's 9 hours. This course is 9 hours. So if you want to know all the ways you can be fucked up and lose your Bitcoin, but hey, you need to learn about this if you want to use it, right? If you want to use it. And, if you're using the ETF, then you can also use NVIDIA. You can also use, some other stock. You don't have to stick with Bitcoin. If you believe Bitcoin is special, then you should just use it and you should use it in a sovereign way. And then you should know all the ways you can get fucked up. And none of the influencer will talk about this. None of the podcaster, like all the mainstream Bitcoin podcaster, they won't talk about it. You know, they will just invite Michael Saylor and Lynn Alden talking about Austrian economics for the 15th time. And, you know, Mike, I was just listening to your show to prepare, and you basically did an excellent summarize about, you know, the end time of the financial system. I think you had, you know, a few weeks ago. And, you know, you can have all the information there. You don't need to you know, go listen to typical Bitcoin influencer. And I think you did a fantastic job at presenting it. But maybe now I got canceled by, you know, all the Bitcoin crowd. But no, look, I think Bitcoin is amazing in a way, but it's just, you know, without privacy and without security, what good is it for? You know, okay, it's a financial surveillance tool with a scarce asset on top of it. Okay, great. But is that what we want? Probably not, right? Probably not.
But I think you're on the right track. And I think anyone that's genuine in the space would appreciate that. The problem with the Bitcoin space is it's so full of disingenuous people who are on a gravy train. I know personally from speaking with friends who are into Bitcoin and have podcasts relating to them, that even small level podcasts are getting paid $3,000 every month just to advertise a Bitcoin wallet or some kind of thing. And they've got multiple sponsors. So they're getting paid $10,000 a month. And I'm not talking massive podcasts here. I'm talking podcasts my level just to advertise something on there. So they're not going to say any of these things that you're going to say because it's going to get them kicked off the gravy train. And, you know, people like Michael Saylor, well, of course, he's a billionaire and is connected with intelligence. But at the lower levels, even like Lynn Alden, and those people get paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to fly around the world, stay in hotels, and speak for an hour at a conference. I mean, come on, Eben, you know, you've got to be a person who's really in a moral space where you can say no to the trinkets and the rewards and the financial stuff to give that genuine take, because you're going to self-censor at that point. And that's why, you know, I appreciate people like you guys saying that.
Yeah, that's certainly incredibly warm comment that you have. It is not always easy, and we had to refuse sponsor, and we had to like, and I have to say, every single sponsor that I refused or that, you know, Gabriel and I refused, I'm happy we refused them. You know, I can safely say. But yeah, this also makes the whole journey much harder because then, you know, you need to make a product that people want. But, you know, we believe in the truth, and we believe that hiding our head in the sand and pretending everything is nice won't help. And this is why we show you those tools. You know, this is why we show you how to, you know, basically read the blockchain. And it's a bit like the tea leaves. You know, there is a lot of heuristics and assumptions and stuff. But this is something I've never seen a mainstream Bitcoin podcast talking about this. Like, the only time I've seen is like, oh, this company, and they had their CEO just boasting how they were preventing cybercrime. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a cybersecurity expert. I love preventing cybercrime, right? But it's not by putting innocent people in jail. And it's not by having phony heuristics and things of that nature. So yeah, if you're curious about this, and there is like, we have like 1 full hour where we explain all the scams that are going on in crypto. And then we have another hour of explaining all the ways you can be tracked with examples and graph. And then we have also, you know, something like half an hour where we show how we use those tools to track some random dude on the internet. And you know what we did is, actually it's kind of funny in a way. We just took one of those, you know, influencer / podcaster, and we put their donation address on this tool. And we say, oh, they send it to this exchange. Hey, they got money from this guy. And yeah, like, okay. So, and the guy he was said to be a privacy, you know, enthusiast. And yet, you know, he's reusing his address everywhere. And it's like, yeah, I mean, you know, think about what happened with the truckers. You know, 90% of the money was seized and couldn't be used.
There's still some people today, Ben, who don't have access to mainstream banking because of that.
Yes, true. Yeah. That is a good reflection.
if we have any kind of systemic collapse, you're not going to get your gold delivered from a vault in Switzerland. It'll cost you tens of thousands of dollars to get your 10 ounces delivered. It's a stupid idea. Or, for example, if you're buying physical gold from a shop in the UK, if you spend more than £5,000 in a single transaction, they're going to record your name and details. And if the government asks for it, they'll hand it over. Or, for example, there's laws on the books where they can recall any gold coin that was minted with basically, we call them legal tender in the UK. So if you've got a legal tender gold coin, that can actually legally be recalled at any point by the government. And all of these things you have to know, but it takes somebody to care. And I think that's what you and Gabriel are actually doing. You're like, hey guys, we care about this. We actually genuinely care about privacy the same way I do. And you're trying to give that knowledge. But the other people who don't care, they don't like it. They don't like that you're doing it because you're making them look bad, I think.
I think it's like anything. You wouldn't believe, unless you're part of this world, you wouldn't believe all the under the table deals and stuff that happen. And sometime, like, I got sponsor telling me, don't worry, Herben, for the first 6 months, you're going to have your indie, a grassroots, whatever product I was trying to have. Could be a podcast, could be a YouTube channel, could be video game, could be anything. And then after 6 months, we're going to start commercialize. We're going to start pumping sponsorship. But then for your audience, you get to live this, we're going to pay you. Don't worry about it. You're going to get the money. But it's basically, we make it look like it's very organic and that it's like, and basically you get to role play the small influencer that becomes bigger. And then, we're going to shield tokens. You're going to shield this. You're going to do that and this. And, and then they invite you, everything is paid and there is champagne and, it's like on top of a tower or something in a nightclub. And I was like, this is amazing. But of course, I didn't sign up because it's like, but
it's hard though. I think it's good for listeners to understand what happens behind the scenes as well. Like the struggles of trying to support yourself to do decent work. I work 70, 80 hours a week every week and I get paid very little. Let's just put it that way. But there is something to being an entrepreneur. There is something to having integrity. And I think in the long run, you grow a decent audience, an honest and loyal audience, rather than just have numbers. Because some of the big shows that have a lot of numbers, I just think I would not want to live that life where you don't have any freedom. You're tied to this fake persona. You're tied to this fake channel giving out shitty information. And everyone in your audience is fake. And I would never want to be a part of that cesspool. So I think it's the right track that we're on. But I think now's a great time to pause for the end of part 1, because in part 2, I really want to get into some of your research techniques, your deep dive research techniques using open source information. And this is something that I don't think many people understand, but I'm really glad we ended part number 1 with some discussion around that, particularly with the blockchain. And then also how you have people out there that are really sharks and they're actually using our online personas and our data to weaponize it against us. So one more time, Erben, thank you for joining us for part number 1. I'm looking forward to part 2. And I'll just direct listeners to your website, which is Escape the Technocracy. Is there anywhere else I can send them?
Yeah, so we are on Twitter, a real Herben hacker, and also the Watchman Privacy Podcast. I'm sure you're going to include all those links. EscapeTheTechnocracy.com. Don't forget to use the coupon, right? If you want to have a nice discount. And happy to join for part 2.
Awesome. I really enjoyed that, Erben. And let's get to part 2.
What you are basically. Deep, deep down, far, far in, is simply the fabric and structure of existence itself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
Honestly expressing yourself.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
Within man, not one man nor a group of men, but in all men, in you the people have the power.
Peace for all men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women.
The fabric and structure of existence itself.
Honestly expressing yourself.
Men and women, for all men and women, for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, peace in all time.